What is up? My name is Matt Workman. In this video, I want to take the time to talk about the last 2 weeks and the work I've been doing specifically with MetaHumans, of course the Vicon mocap system, and virtual fashion or custom clothing, and just kind of document and walk through my process of what I've been doing and a little bit of what I've learned and questions I have for the future. So step one when creating virtual clothing for MetaHumans specifically is to create the overall pattern or the base mesh of the garment or piece of clothing that you're trying to create. And to do that, I use a very specialized program called Marvelous Designer. This is what pretty much the industry uses at this point to design soft clothing. Armor and stuff like that, there's lots of other ways to approach it, but for clothing simulation, this is like kind of a fashion program more than it is a 3D program. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of free and medium and probably high-end courses on how to actually design nice-looking clothing with this program. So there's a lot of documentation. It's pretty affordable on the indie side or student side, and pretty easy to learn. After that, this is the harder part. I brought it into Maya, which is where I do my skinning. And again, I've done a little bit of this. I'm not like an expert at it. Watched a couple more tutorials on rigging and skinning in Maya or Blender. These are the things that you want to search if you want to learn how to do it. And I did something that's called copy skin weights from the MetaHuman body to the clothing. That gives you, like, depending on the garment, maybe like 80% of the work done there, roughly, really roughly. And then from there, you're just doing skin weight painting, where you select the bone, you're like, the shoulder bone, you're like, what part of that mesh that you just created do you want to be affected by it, and how much? That's a very long, laborious process, and that is where most people will end their journey, who are not full 3D artists who make a living or want to make a living at it. The rigging part and the skinning part, rather, is really the hardest part. And after skinning the garment in Maya, I bring it back to Unreal Engine. And the fun part in Unreal Engine that I was experimenting with is that you can simulate clothing and cloth in Unreal Engine. So what you basically do is you select the mesh you brought in, you switch to mesh painting, and then you can just paint on the mesh, and it's not hard, it's way easier than skinning. You're just like, this part, you paint it, and it turns white, and you're like, simulate the cloth, and that's pretty much it. So the question is, how do you stop the cloth simulation from going through the body and whatnot? And for that, each piece, each garment, each skeletal mesh will have its own collision asset or physics asset, which is a bunch of basically simplified shapes that you would put onto the skeleton of that piece of clothing, and those will determine where the cloth goes and where it doesn't go. If you want to watch videos on how to set that up, it's pretty easy. And just search Unreal Engine cloth simulation. So I did that a couple times this week, and I want to just kind of talk about each project. So the first project I did was a Naruto character from the Akatsuki clan or group, and it's basically just a long robe. Really easy to make. Just take a t-shirt, drag out the arms, drag out the bottom, and that's all I literally did. And the first thing that happened when I was using this garment was that the sleeves were completely ripping, right? So you'd see the MetaHuman's hand, and then it would rip out of it and then come back in and rip out, right? And I did some more research, and instead of basically making the entire sleeve purple, or white rather, and simulated, I actually took the top of it and I kind of stabilized the top of the hand, all the way through here. That part would just permanently stick there. It's like putting glue on your shirt and just letting this part go. And that ended up stabilizing it quite a bit. The next thing I wanted to add to the Naruto character that I knew would work really well was a hat with some cloth paper streamers. And this is the outfit that some of the characters wear in Naruto. And so that one, I didn't even go to Marvelous Designer. I just took a bunch of rectangles from Maya and I just stuck them on this hat. The hat I didn't make. I think it's Decagon. Unreal Engine Marketplace. There's lots of clothing on the marketplace. I'll kind of talk about how you integrate that in after. At this point, I learned how to do the physics asset a little bit better. So I had a collision for my head, from my neck, from my chest, I think even from my, yeah, definitely from my arms. And so when you get the collisions right, I was able to actually like touch the streamers like this. And that's how I started off my demo clip, was like, hey, look, I can hit these streamers. And then from there, I just started spinning around in circles and flipping around, and it was a good time. So my second demo was to make something that was more like armor, like hard armor. And I've been playing a lot of Halo Infinite, and I was like, what better model to do with armor and a helmet than the Master Chief? I just basically took what I believe is the Master Chief model from Fortnite. I didn't rip it. I just downloaded it from an Epic Games website, technically Sketchfab. And I thought what I was going to do was say, okay, it comes with its own skeleton, which is kind of like a Fortnite skeleton, which is kind of like a mannequin skeleton. And I was like, hey, I'm going to just use this in Shogun, right? And not use the MetaHuman skeleton. Well, that skeleton has been ripped from a game, brought into Blender, and then brought back out, and people have been messing with it. And just overall, I'll link to the mesh, because the mesh is good and the textures are good. The skeleton is garbage and pretty much unusable. I would have to re-rig it myself, or basically delete half and regenerate. And it was such a mess. I was like, okay, so how am I gonna get this, Spartan armor onto the MetaHuman skeleton, which was probably the better approach anyway. So I opened up the Spartan armor in Maya, and what I basically did was started to isolate the different parts. So I took just the helmet off, just the shoulder pad, just the arm pads, just the waist part, right? And that's what you can do with like hard mesh armor pieces. And I basically then, once all the parts were separated, I just manually placed each piece on the MetaHuman that's like standing in A pose. And then I reskinned it pretty much for the upper body, all hard bound. So basically like saying, oh, the head bone, it controls 100% of the helmet, was fine. And then like the shoulder pad, guess what? 100% of the shoulder pad is controlled by the upper arm. So I did that for the entire upper body. I tried that for the lower body, and that doesn't work so well. There's a big difference between how a live action movie would look like, and that's kind of what I was trying to do with the upper body, versus what a video game would look like. So the lower body really was taking almost the entire lower body of Master Chief and then doing the traditional skinning route on that. And the trade-off is that if you look really closely at like the knees or the ankles of the Spartan armor, is that they kind of bend, they kind of squish a little bit, because that's typically what you have to do to make video game skinning, performant and look good. So when I'm all in motion, it's not a big deal, but if I was to like just sit there and move just my leg or something like that, you would kind of see that the binding is a little bit squishy. It's not like a realistic VFX rig where like, hard armor shouldn't deform too much. The next part was to, again, get the props to look really good. And let me go get something. So I'm using the actual like in-game rifle from Fortnite, not from Halo, but they're similar. And then a prop gun that's very, very similar to it. So the mapping was really close. If you look really closely, this is, I probably can't show it. I don't talk about marker placement because like you really have to have a Vicon before that like is relevant. But anyway, it's a different type of marker placement than I was doing before, and it worked out perfectly, like really nicely. So the third and like final project of the last week anyway was to make a MetaHuman Jedi. I wanted a character that was, from a fandom, but had like their face more prominently shown, and then allowed me to do my second take on how to do clothing. Again, back into Marvelous Designer, start with a t-shirt. I take the t-shirt and I turned it into kind of like a kimono that would like wrap over each other. Added a belt, and then I added some longer sleeves. I have a new way of doing that. And then I added the two kind of like shoulder streamers or whatever. They turn into like shoulder pads up here, and then they kind of dangle in the front, and then they tuck into the belt in the back. After that, brought it into Maya again, really straightforward rigging. The hard part is that when you have really long pieces of clothing like this that go far away from the body, and the big shoulder pads or whatever, shoulder areas of cloth and the big back parts that happen, is that the looser fitting the clothing is, the less the copy weights technique is going to work. You get like 60% of it now, and a lot of it's wrong. And there's no way to help you with this. There's no automated, like, easy workflow. You click each bone, you try to figure out what the patterns are, and with the weight distribution, and you just, like, start trying to fix it. That's all I can say. Like, so what happens is if you pick up your arms, that, like, this part of the mesh will, like, come with it or something like that. So you got to figure out what bone's doing that, and you got to set it to 0, and then you got to smooth it back out, and that's what skin painting looks like. So that one took like a full hour to clean that one up, and it's not perfect. In Unreal Engine for the cloth sim, again, I did like the long sleeve sim with the stabilized tops for the sleeves, and then the front like loincloth kind of cloth that's moving around, that was just completely simulated, and it looked okay, but I have some thoughts on that as well, which I'll talk about after. I had that and my lightsaber from the demo I had done earlier. Nothing much different there. I would say that the main difference with this demo compared to that is that I'd properly mapped the hands much better and the hand placements. So when I grabbed the lightsaber with both hands, it really lined up really well. And then doing like the spins and all the different things, it worked out pretty nicely. Something that I overlooked, and because this is my first hour testing it live, is that when I like spread my legs, is that like the Jedi robe has like, you know, kind of a skirt that's there, and the simulated cloth would just clip right through that. So I would have to put like either a special collision there or just rethink the rigging so that wouldn't happen. The sleeves weren't tearing in this case. It was just I made the collision for the wrist too small, so you would see like the real MetaHuman skin pop out every once in a while. But overall, all of these demos went really well. So that wraps it up for this video. Really long. It's not poppy and catchy. It's just like, I just want to document in kind of a longer form as well, format, the work I'm doing with the MetaHumans, with Vicon, and just share that for the people that are following along now or will eventually follow along. I just want to know a little bit more about the MetaHuman demos that they might be seeing on the different social media platforms. So that wraps it for this week. I'll see you on the next video. Peace.